No talent, no control, and no hope. With some of the most ridiculous and bizarre records in history, and with a grand total of 0 overtakes in his entire F1 career. This racer was so slow and so incredibly awful that even he called himself the worst F1 driver ever. Of course, this is the story of Taki Inoue, the slowest F1 driver of all time. Taki Inoue was born in Kobe, Japan in 1963, and like pretty much all other drivers fitting into the world category, he came from a very wealthy family. But unlike most, his passion for F1 developed over time, kind of by chance. When he was 15, he went out to buy some sweets and came across a James Hunt trading card. When he asked what it was, they told him it was Formula 1, a sport deemed impossible for the Japanese. But when you're a spoiled rich kid, impossible isn't a word you like too much. So this was it, right? The start of his racing career. Not quite. It would actually be 7 years later, at the ripe age of 22, that he'd first stepped foot into racing. That was very old to get started, even back then. But as you'll see, Inoue was never really the type of guy to follow the standard path. Inoue first joined the Fuji Touring Car Series, a rookie competition where, well, you could already tell that driving wasn't his thing. He didn't stand out or do anything remotely impressive, but hey, at least he wasn't known for being terrible just yet. But still, that experience somehow got him fired up to become a pro driver. So to chase his dreams, and much to the relief of Japanese motorsport, in 1987, Inoue packed up and headed to England. There, he signed up for the Jim Russell Racing School Academy to start racing in single-seaters. Back then, Inoue knew 0 English, had 0 professional driving experience, didn't know the tracks, and was much older than the rest. Basically, any random kid off the street would have had a better shot. But none of that stopped Inoue from chasing his dreams. Even with all those challenges, Inoue would give everything he had on track, which wasn't much to be honest, but still. As part of his academy training, he raced in the British Formula Ford in 1987 and 88. And once again, his participation went unnoticed, and apart from a few offs, spins, and rolls, Inoue didn't stand out or do anything notable. After those 2 years, where he had at least learnt the basics of driving, Inoue went back home to jump into Japanese Formula 3, a solid step to keep moving up. There, between 1989 and 91, Inoue scored a grand total of 0 points. And you might be wondering how he stuck around so long if he was this awful. And well, the truth is that, while he was clueless on track, he was a master of making things happen off it. In 1992, he somehow landed a spot with Supernova, a newly formed and ambitious team that later brought up stars like Mark Webber and Juan Pablo Montoya. Yep, Inoue was one of the team's early stars. And remember, Japanese F3 was supposed to be for young drivers to stay for a couple of seasons at most before moving up, but Inoue was already 28, so only 2 realistic options here. He was friends with the owner, or he threw a big bag of money their way. I'll let you decide. With Supernova, Inoue finally had a somewhat good season in 1992, finishing 10th in the standings with 5 points and even scoring 2 fourth-place finishes. It looked like he was finally getting better, not like there was much room to get worse though. In 1993, he actually stepped it up, ending up 9th in the championship with 6 points. Yeah, the results weren't amazing and his teammates beat him both years, but Inoue was on a roll and no one could hold him back. Once again, the Japanese phenomenon used his sales skills and convinced Supernova to take him back to Europe to race in the International Formula 3000. It was a big step up for him, as it was basically the gateway to F1 back then, and he pulled it off without doing much on track. Unfortunately, his season literally couldn't have been any worse. He scored a grand total of 0 points in 8 races, with a best qualifying position of 15th and a best race finish of 9th. And no, even though he got that 9th place, in F3000 only the top 6 got points back then. So Inoue ended up dead last among all drivers. But that had to be because his car was awful, right? Well, let's take a look at his teammate Vincenzo Sospiri, shall we? Sospiri pretty much called Inoue terrible in every way possible. So after 5 seasons in Japanese Formula 3 and 1 International Formula 3000 without doing anything, the logical move for any driver would be to retire and try something else, right? Well, Inoue had other plans. Inoue used his negotiating skills once again, pitching to F1 teams like LaRousse, Footwork and Lotus, clearly trying to impress them with his wallet rather than his driving skills. And honestly, given his track record, no matter how much cash he had, it was pretty optimistic to think he'd land a seat in F1. But as I've shown you so far, Inoue's career never made any sense. And then, a Japanese company saw a golden opportunity to put up $2 million to sponsor him, leading to this. I think even Inoue himself thought the joke had gone too far, but well, just like that, the Japanese driver who had zero talent and had barely scored any points since he started racing would make his Formula 1 debut at the sweet age of 31. Simtek had lost their driver Roland Ratzenberger in the San Marino Grand Prix that season, and since then they hadn't found a solid driver to team up with David Brabham. Of course, they were one of the smallest teams and really needed the cash Inoue was bringing. It was like the stars aligned for the whole world to be impressed by Inoue's lack of talent. And he definitely didn't disappoint. In qualifying, Inoue was 26th, dead last, and over 3 seconds slower than his teammate and almost 8 seconds off pole. So, Inoue still had Sunday to prove everyone wrong and show he deserved that seat in F1. But that didn't last long.
The Simtek has just gone spinning down the pit lane. It's Taki Inoue, the Japanese driver who was making his Grand Prix debut.
Not even 3 laps in. Obviously, after his embarrassing weekend at Suzuka, Simtek didn't put him back in the car, and his F1 dreams were pretty much crushed. But you're starting to know Inoue. He wasn't gonna give up this easily. How in the hell did he pull this off again? The truth is, nobody really knows how he did it, but he managed to convince the naive company Japan Tobacco to fund his F1 career, buying him a seat at Footwork Arrows for 1995. But the numbers had changed. We're not talking a few mils anymore. They injected please get ready for this, a staggering $19 million to have him race again. What the actual fuck? And of course, with such a humongous amount of money, he was gonna stick around for the whole season this time. He had 17 races ahead of him to prove what he was truly made of. At Arrows, Inoue was teamed up with Gianni Morbidelli, a 27-year-old driver with a few seasons in F1 already. And while Morbidelli hadn't made much of a splash, he had some success in lower categories. To put it simply, he was a decent driver and a good point of comparison for Inoue. But finally, it was showtime for Inoue. In qualifying, Inoue ended up 21st. It doesn't seem too bad at first, but he was nearly 3 seconds slower than Morbidelli, who managed to finish 13th. And well, in the race, while Morbidelli was fighting for points, Inoue was just trying to keep the car on track until lap 48.
The people and an engine fire. This is Taki Inoue, a big time fire in the footwork car.
And that was just a taste of what was coming. In the next race in Argentina, Inoue ended up dead last in qualifying, over 10 seconds slower than Morbidelli, who once again made it close to the top 10, finishing 12th. And yeah, you heard it right, 10 seconds. Absolutely insane. And of course, during the race he crashed, and that pretty much summed up his next races as well. Always way behind Morbidelli in qualifying and in the race. Another crash at Imola, and a transmission failure in Barcelona. Fair enough, that one wasn't really his fault, but who knows. Then, in the first free practice session in Monaco, we witnessed one of the greatest moments of his entire career. The Japanese driver lost his brakes and left his car in the pool area to be towed by a crane. Then, the safety car showed up, crashed into the crane, ended up on top of it, and smacked right into Inoue's head. As you can see, he was hit so hard, he passed out. Luckily, they soon confirmed he was okay and had survived thanks to his helmet. He later described it to Top Gear like this.
My helmet was totally squashed. Then I see the doctor. Usual procedure. They tried to see my dick first, touching my balls. When balls move, brain is fine. When big crash, scissors, take off the overalls, see the balls, hit the balls. Then when balls move, this guy's fine. If balls don't move, then there's a problem with brain damage, I think.
I won't be commenting on this quote. At least he had a sense of humor, I guess. Poor Inoue had to keep racing that weekend, but once again, he ended up last in qualifying and had to retire from the race because of a gearbox failure. So far, Inoue had racked up 5 retirements in 5 races, and it made a grand total of 0 overtakes. When he wasn't crashing, his car was just breaking down. Meanwhile, Morbidelli had finished 3 races, with his best results being a respectable 9th place. But luck was about to turn for Inoue, Inoue in Montreal. Even though he once again ended up among the bottom 3 in qualifying, in the race, he finished. Yep, Inoue completed his first F1 Grand Prix, and to top it off, he finished in 9th place. Is this the beacon of hope we had all been waiting for? Well, not exactly. The reality is he was still last. Only reason he was able to finish 9th is because there were literally only 9 cars that finished the race. Of course, his teammate beat him once again by finishing 6th and scoring a point. And after this glimpse of hope, it was the same old story, crashing at the first corner in France. And then just a few races later, Arrows made the shocking announcement they were letting go one of their drivers. Everyone knew it. Finally. Yeah, no. They let go of Morbidelli. Their only hope. For who? Max Papis, another paid driver. Double trouble. In his first qualifying session, Papis managed to beat team star Inoue, and then both of them crashed in the same race. Things couldn't have been going any better for Arrows, right? Same story in Germany, both retiring due to gearbox issues. But it was in Hungary that Inoue stole the spotlight again. For the first time in his career, he outqualified his teammates, though that wasn't what that weekend was remembered for. During the race, Inoue was once again struggling to stay on track, when suddenly, on lap 13, his engine just blew up. The Japanese driver, with good intentions, quickly got out of his car to grab a fire extinguisher and, well...
Oh, goodness gracious me, now that's absolutely appalling.
He was taken to the hospital, but thankfully he was back in time for the next race. It would have been just another accident during that era if it weren't for his other crash with the safety car in Monaco, making him the only driver in F1 history to be hit by this safety car not once, but twice. It's a record that seems simply impossible to beat. But Inoue wanted to make history, right? Well, he sure did. But we haven't got to the best moment just yet. In Belgium, he outqualified Papis again and finished the race in 12th place. He wasn't last this time, but once again didn't make a single overtake all race. And in Monza, while Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill were fighting for 2nd place. Wow, that felt weird to say, thinking these three were actually racing each other. Anyways, Inoue, who was about to be lapped, decided to switch his line to mix things up a bit.
Hill hits Schumacher and they both go off. They both go off. This is a repetition of Silverstone.
2 birds, 1 stone, I guess. Hill wasn't happy with Inoue at all. Later on, Inoue admitted it was his fault. You don't say. Yet, for Taki, this ended up being his best race ever. He finished 8th, but realistically, after taking out 2 and 10 more dropping out, he only ended up ahead of 2 cars, and once again, without making a single overtake. And to top it all off, Papis still finished ahead of him, so he had still not beaten a teammate once.
Well, I'm really comfortable with the Arrows car.
Then Papis ran out of playing money and Arrows brought back Morbidelli, but nothing had changed since his last race with the team. During the final part of the season, Inoue only managed to finish the Japanese GP in 12th whilst retiring due to car issues in the European and Pacific GPs. And in the last race in Australia, he retired after this embarrassing accident.
As you look at Taki Inoue bowing out of the Australian Grand Prix,
which was the final straw. What even was that? Meanwhile, here's how Morbidelli was doing. The Italian shut everyone up by getting a podium out of nowhere with that car, while Inoue was just lucky to keep it on track. By the end of the season, Inoue had racked up 2 fires, 5 crashes, 2 gearbox failures, 2 engine blowouts, and a transmission failure. On top of that, the amount of mistakes, spins, and off-track moments he left behind was insane. At least 1 per race. In total, 13 retirements and only 5 races finished, with a 72.22% retirement rate. The Japanese driver holds yet another unbeatable record.
Well, I don't know. My driving I believe, is getting better.
Of course, as soon as the season wrapped up, Arrows kicked him out. No matter how much money he brought in, Inoue clearly wasn't worth it. With that, his time in F1 seemed done. But knowing Inoue, he'd go all out off track to pay his way back onto the grid.
Do you already know what's going to happen to you in 1996?
No, I don't know. Well, we have to see.
After talking with teams like Tyrrell, Inoue announced in January that he'd be driving for Minardi in 1996. Yep, He had somehow done it once again. He seemed relentless to keep proving he was the worst driver on the grid. However, at the last minute, one of his personal sponsors pulled out, probably because they realized how ridiculous this was getting. So Minardi ended up signing Giancarlo Fisichella, who not only had way more talent than Inoue, but also brought in a load of cash from Marlboro. And just like that, his F1 fairy tale came to an end, much to the relief of the other drivers and team owners. After his stint in Formula 1, Inoue raced in different categories for a few more years, sticking to his usual routine of doing pretty much nothing, before finally retiring for the good of motorsport. These days, Inoue, who of course is living in Monaco, manages and coaches Japanese drivers, and honestly, given how he managed his own career and got as far as he did without any talent, he must be pretty good at it. Plus, Inoue is very active on social media and is known for his great sense of humor, always cracking jokes about his racing career, admitting he wasn't cut out for Formula 1, and even calling himself the worst driver ever. And just like I kicked off in the Go Tifi video, it's time to put Inoue on our top list of worst drivers ever. And honestly, I think Inoue belongs in the terrible category, right next to his fellow countryman Yuji Ide. As we've seen, he never had any real talent, only scored a few points since he started racing, and had a total of 0 overtakes in F1. Plus, the amount of mistakes and accidents, insane. He had a few glimpses of hope and managed to beat Papis on occasion, so no Mazepin status for Taki. And despite all his screw-ups, he never had a huge crash like some others on this list. But you have the final say. If you think he should be even lower or that I've been too harsh, let me know in the comments. And sure, Inoue was incredibly awful, but the guy's got charisma and can at least laugh about it, unlike some other paid drivers who actually think they're good, like this guy. If you haven't already, watch it now. And as always, thank you for watching.